everyone, and welcome back to the P2 podcast. We are in the midst of a pretty cool topic, talking about AI and how it's revolutionized our world, all of our surroundings, especially our fitness space. Where we left off, we were talking about the moral and sometimes ethical dilemmas that we find ourselves in as this very new tool is being introduced. You have people who, are very much against it because they're like, hey, it can, remove some people from the space because it can do things that people take hours to do in seconds, and definitely encouraging users to adapt these tools into their service and still maintain that person-to-person communication and that person-to-person aspect, while also still understanding that these tools are coming. And if you do not learn how to use them, you will become antiquated very, very quickly. There's also another space in this moral, ethical conversation when it comes down to people actually adopting these tools, but maybe adopting them in ways that lack integrity or are not necessarily as thoughtful as they should be. And so that is where we will pick up. Thank you again for joining us, and I'll hand it off to Bryce to head off this topic.
Yeah, so I definitely think that there is going to be, and there already is, I'm already seeing it, we've already seen it. As soon as ChatGPT was released, I think that was November of 2022, if I'm not mistaken, all of a sudden, AI became commoditized. Everyone had access to something that was extremely, extremely powerful, and in a lot of cases, people had not really understood the power that was being built inside of these LLMs and these AIs. And then as soon as ChatGPT became easily accessible, and they threw a nice user interface on top of it, all of a sudden you saw everyone talking about it. It was like the fastest growing commercial app, I think, in history, maybe until like Threads or something like that, which, that was, just taking advantage of Instagram's popularity, Facebook's. But ChatGPT, I think, was like that what the fuck moment for a lot of people whenever they first started playing around with it. And they're like, wow, I didn't realize that it was this far along. I mean, it feels like you're having a conversation with someone on the other end. It's like, it's very creepy at times. And it also didn't take long for people to start abusing the access to these very powerful AIs. And, we've had conversations about my thoughts around this like pretty frequently. I've written an article about it, which is like completely out of my expertise and domain. But it's just one of those things where I see where this is going if we're not cautious about it. And luckily right now, these AIs are they're still just artificial enough to where you can pick up on the signs and symptoms of overuse of these tools. Like in the grand tapestry of like, bro, there's no fucking grand tapestry to fitness. It's just fitness, right? It's you can see where people are using these tools too much, not going back in and like making the necessary edits. And now we've been acclimated to it enough to where it's kind of embarrassing, right? Like if you see people just continuing to be really lazy with how they're using things like ChatGPT, you see it and you're like, bro, come on, like have some integrity here, like some self-respect. At least go in and change some of these like trigger words, Right. But what we're going to end up seeing is we're going to end up seeing an internet and a data sphere that is flooded with artificially generated text, media, tokens, if you want to get technical, which could potentially end up being relatively problematic, right? And I think a large symptom of this over-reliance on tools like ChatGPT is just coming down to people's laziness. It really is, and I think we talked about it last time where like these tools have the ability to make you X% more productive at what you're doing. They have the ability to raise the floor on every domain, right? So if you're someone who is just learning how to program, if you get one of these tools in your hands, all of a sudden, it's not nearly as intimidating. You can go from like complete novice to intermediate really quickly. the really advanced people are still probably not getting as much utility out of things like this because they're beyond the expertise of they're general tools, but they're still somewhat domain limited, right? Like they're not going to be revolutionizing particle physics like tomorrow. But they can make really interesting relations that humans would otherwise miss because we're limited. But they can do a really, really good job of like raising the average. And I think that's where they're very important. But what you see a lot of people that are using ChatGPT to just output blog posts. It's like, write me a blog post about why cardio is good for you. And then it's like, boom, output, they copy paste that, they throw it in their blog, and they publish it, and they're done with it. Like they don't even look twice. Or you see it with like marketing or copywriting or advertising or any of these other things, right? And again, it's just good enough that most people won't be able to detect it. And there are no artificial intelligence AI detectors that are good enough to be able to reliably parse what is human generated versus what is AI generated. So that's where you see things like in university settings, they're starting to migrate away from this ban on tools like ChatGPT, and they're trying to figure out ways of encouraging their students to work more ethically with those tools, right? Which is what I think should be done. We should be teaching people and encouraging people to use these tools as much as possible, but still have the appropriate oversight over the outputs, right? Mm-hmm. It shouldn't just be a single prompt and a single copy and paste from a single output. Right? There should be an iterated back and forth literally a conversation with these chatbots to figure out what exactly you need. You should be looking it over. You should be editing it. You should be making changes. That's what needs to be happening. But again, I don't think that a lot of people are going to take those necessary steps because the incentives always they always drag the lowest hanging fruit down. You know, if everyone is using ChatGPT to get 20% better, but if one person can use it to be 50% better while cutting corners here and there, they're going to do that because then they're going to have an edge on everyone else. But then that requires everyone else to cut those same edges to not fall behind, right? It's the exact same thing as taking PEDs in sports.
Right.
You know what I mean? Yeah. So like if one person is taking PEDs in sports, everyone has to take PEDs in sports. Otherwise you risk falling behind. It's just game theory, right? It sucks, but that's where the incentives are. So with these tools, it's really, really important to understand what the limitations are currently and then in the future, and then also the appropriate ethical ways to work with them rather than trying to use them as a way to like create this unethical advantage for you over everyone else. It's not a tool to bridge the gap from novice to expert level. It's just, again, it's to help you get to sufficient to meet that threshold to where you can then focus your time elsewhere.
Yeah. I was actually thinking about that exact same parallel is obviously just drug use in sports, but I guess I'd probably come back to this thought a couple of times when having the conversation with you, because to me, it's funny, right? But I guess you always see it, right? I love learning via conversation. That's my favorite way to learn, which is actually why I actually really enjoy these tools, is because I'd rather talk to the thing and figure out my truth on the idea, right? Not just, what's this? And have it spit me an answer. And I'm like, well, why? Where'd you get this from? I want to have a conversation. I want to be able to have that conversation so that I can then go and have a conversation that doesn't sound like regurgitation. And so much of, even before this, so much of conversations so many of the conversations you have with people on a daily basis are just regurgitation. Like there's not a lot of people, I think, that have full constructive conversation with others and then with their self, and then they do like sift through and kind of develop their own voice around this topic, right? And I think that started with like the internet. And you and I have talked about this in a past podcast where I always say there's two different types of millennials. You have the millennials that were born, what was it, late 80s to early 90, 92, 93, and then the millennials born 95 after, right? The ones that could just go Google something. The ones that in school, Wikipedia might have become a source they could use. But we're from a generation of millennials where you had to have 4 or 5 sites that you were pulling from, and then put them at the bottom of your paper in MLA format, and then also put the pages from whatever book you read and this and that. And so as you were thinking about or saying, hey, these universities are trying to encourage people now, as they should, I'm thinking, like, what if there's a way to cite the prompts that you use and then cite what you get from the prompts and how you implement that into your essays or into your research? Because there should be almost like a show your work aspect, that you're not just going, Googling, and then possibly paraphrasing, if that, copy paste and putting on a piece of paper. You mentioned the trigger words, and for me, I don't know why, I guarantee 9 out of 10 people on this call do not know how to use colons or semicolons in sentences. And so whenever I see the colon, I'm always like, yep, okay, well, like
it's always the colon in the title. It's like the pursuit of happiness. What does this mean for human longevity, right? Like shit like that, It's always the same fucking bullshit whenever you ask ChatGPT for an essay or for an article. And the thing is too, is like, I know that people's brains don't work in that structured of a manner. Like human brains and human thoughts are messy, really, really messy, but machines are organized. Like ChatGPT is organized as fuck it's structured. So that's where I think that these tools are actually best used, is it's a companion, right? It's like a research assistant. It's an intern. It's someone who can help you structure your messy thoughts and your messy work. And that's really one of the reasons that I use ChatGPT and a lot of these tools so often. It's not to create things for me. It's to help me structure and streamline my messy brain, because I have a lot of shit just jumbled up in there. And I really need someone to kind of like strain out all the shit and just find like that little tiny speck of gold at the very bottom. And really, like, that's what these AIs help me do, because like you can have, like you said, you can have that conversation. And I think that was actually the almost light bulb moment for these tools to take off. Was before that, they had what were called playgrounds. And playgrounds were for mostly developers, right? And you had to go through these almost back channels of OpenAI's website, or, whatever other company who's creating these larger models. And like to get access to GPT-3, for example, you would have to go to the playground. And it was so rudimentary. It was like this basic text box. You could play around some of the filters, like the temperature, which most people don't even know what temperature means. You could choose the models, like the DaVinci 3 model. Most people had no idea what that was. Or I think they had the Curie model. So all of that shit, right? No one even knows about that. That was back in the day, right? Like, I'm speaking gibberish to a lot of people who have only known ChatGPT. But that's the difference between packaging it in a way that is a really, really helpful and usable user interface, which is the chatbot model, which is what was tried for a long time in the past and honestly kind of failed spectacularly. But that's because these models weren't good enough. The AIs that they were using in the past, they were horrible compared to what they are now. And the reason that they're so good now is because they're just gigantic. They're gigantic models. And actually what we've talked about before, and I think what we talked about on the last iteration of this conversation that we had, was the data is what makes the models. And the most important thing with this data is having really distilled high quality data. And the internet is a gold mine. And these search engines are like striking oil. I mean, that data is internet oil. That's literally what that is. And it is oil for these models. And the richer you are in oil, the more money that you'll be able to make from them. And there's a gigantic incentive to continue collecting all of this data, which is why like Google has scraped YouTube. So they've been able to tokenize all of YouTube, which is a gigantic undertaking. Honestly, if you think about it, it's technically insane that they were able to make all of the data in every YouTube video, and I'm sure the comments as well, which is, again, fucking crazy if you think about it. They were able to take all of that and put it into their Gemini model, which is why it's like what they call multimodal, right? So like it is really, really good at being able to take a picture and tell you what is in that picture, because it's seen a lot of fucking pictures. It's seen a lot of frames in videos, right? And even OpenAI, like or GPT, Chat GPT, whatever you want to call it, right? Their models are so good because they have so much data, because they've been doing this for so long that they were scraping the internet before people even realized that they were sitting on gold.
Right.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure now, like a lot of these sites are trying to close themselves down, like X, Twitter, whatever. They close down data scraping. So they're only allowed to be scraped by Grok, which is xAI's model, which is owned by Elon, who owns X, Twitter, whatever, right? But Reddit, I'm pretty sure just had and signed a partnership with, I think, Microsoft, OpenAI, and it's like, 100. Fuck, I'm gonna completely botch this number. It's a large number, but essentially giving OpenAI the ability to scrape Reddit for more data. Data is super fucking important, right? And all of this is to say that whenever you start getting into these proprietary models, people saying that they have their own AI, they have their system that's run on AI. No, that's bullshit, right? It's bullshit. So what they're doing is they've either created a wrapper on top of one of these other models, probably GPT-4 from OpenAI, and they've created essentially a user interface, and on the back end, they're querying GPT, and they're getting answers that way. So they don't have the AI. They're just talking to an AI that is opened, or that is created and owned by another company. Still kind of cool. You can do a lot of stuff with that, right?
Yeah. It's like a proxy. No,
yeah, yes, exactly. It's a proxy. And the thing is too, is there's a process called fine tuning, which means that you can take these large models and you can tune them for whatever specific task you want, right? So if you want an AI that is like really, really good at like building financial models, right? Or analyzing financial data, you can do that. And you can take something like GPT-4 and you can fine tune it towards becoming a financial guru or analyst, right? And it's essentially just training it even more. That's the best way of thinking about it. You train it more and more and more, and you make it very specialized. That's fine tuning. But what these fitness companies or health companies, whatever they're talking about having an AI or AI powered X, AI powered training app, whatever, it's not. They're not even querying GPT-4 in the background or any of these larger models. They're not doing that. They're not wrappers. Like what we talked about before, all they're doing is they're just building some kind of like logic, some normal programming logic into the app. And that's really rudimentary. It's really simple to do. People have been doing that for the last 100 years, right? It's maybe not 100, 80 years, right? It's not hard. But like what I'm sure is going to happen whenever we release this, if you put AI in anything, people automatically assign a greater value to it because they think that there's something more going on. And it's a very hypey word, right? People are very interested in AI right now because of the potential for it, right? Like there's so much potential. But I think that especially in our domain, who is going to win the AI race isn't going to be someone who actually builds their own AI, because that's impossible. It's completely impossible unless you have the resources of Google or Microsoft or Twitter or anyone like that, right? Unless you have billions and billions and billions of dollars to pay these data providers to buy GPUs, to house data centers, you're not training your own fucking AI. Not now, right? It's over. Those times have passed. You're behind. Whoever is going to figure out how to put the best wrapper on top of one of these larger models is going to be able to get a gigantic advantage in our field, right? Mm-hmm. But that's still not easy. That's still not an easy task. You have to be really, really technically proficient and also understand who you're building for and how to like best tune that for that population, which we've actually had these conversations in the past, like multiple times, because if you can do that, you basically have an infinitely divisible an infinitely available expert at your fingertips at all times who can give you any answer that you ever want, provide you with any adjustment, modification, program, macronutrient, et cetera, at all times. And like the value of that is, I mean, I don't even think I have to like describe how valuable something like that is, but anyone who can do that is going to pretty much win. And it's going to be like a race to do that first as well, because if you can do that first, there's no need for coaches anymore, right? Like if we were able to do that and do it well to the point where like it passes the Turing test, right? Like someone could be on the other side of that app and not know if they're talking to us or an AI. If you can do it well, it negates the need for all of these other individual coaches outside of if you want to get on and have a face-to-face conversation like this, which you could still potentially have, right? Like you can still have human people operating in that business, but the monotonous work, the data-driven work, the data analysis, the day-to-day decisions, the communication, like that can be done and outsourced to an AI who can do it faster, better, make connections that we would miss. It doesn't get tired. Like those are the things we talked about. Like if you're in a surgical room, like you want that. You want that, absolutely. You want to reduce your margin of error. There is going to be an overhead liability, but we already have liability. We have to have liability insurance. We have to be certified. Like there's a lot that we have to do to be able to have these conversations with people, but it is going to be an interesting next like 5 years, decade, whatever, in our field because of where this is inevitably going to go. It's inevitable, right? But it'll be a curious way and a curious route and path to get there.
Yeah, the whole time you were talking, the idea of a personal assistant that has an endless vat of data and information to be able to pull from. I just kept thinking of remember the paperclip that would pop up when you're using Word?
Would be, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know why, like that, like Ask Jeeves, or like even the little like DNA GIF that comes off from Jurassic Park, right? He was like giving them the tour and shit like that.
The proto clippy.
Yeah. So it's one of those things where, like, obviously it's scary to some, super interesting to others, like very, very interesting to me, very interesting to you, obviously. And I think that if there's anything that any of the listeners can take from what was just said by Bryce is that if you're not learning these tools, right, not just using, but if you're not learning these tools, because I think that's where we are right now, is there are a lot of people who just use, but they're using like they use Google. They're using like they use, something. They're not learning the tool. Thus, the harnessing of it is never coming for them, right? But if you want to be able to harness this tool and augment your life or your business in some way, you have to learn it. And that comes in having conversations and understanding how these generation tools work, how prompting works, how to engineer and ask the right questions to get to the right answers as efficiently as possible, but then to still be able to add color and really, again, just get full comprehension of the device, because you can't put a wrapper on something you don't understand. And that's what we're at right now, right? As people are, whether they're the wrapper, right? They're just like, yeah, this is what I know because Chat GPT told me so. Or this is my blog because Chat GPT wrote it based on, a question I asked it. They're this very plain, rudimentary, unsophisticated wrapper. But if you can understand it and you can go, hey, you know what? Hey, I wrote this, put it in here. I want to say this a bit more concisely. I want to say this, but to this group of people. Can you help me with this messy thought, right? Because now you're starting to understand, okay, cool. You're going to give me a more mathematical answer, right? Like you mentioned, it's very, very orderly. And you can always tell when people are using these things because their talk track sounds mechanical. It sounds mathematical. Even the rhythm of it sounds like boop, beep, boop, beep, boop, beep, boop. Like, you can see it in the writing. It's really hard to miss if you're familiar with these things. Which I guess kind of like starts to bridge into that, like, we've left the unethical use space and now we can talk about a bit more when we see the flaws of how people just use, right? When just using something like ChatGPT to, for instance, build a workout for a person who might have specific needs, what are some of the biggest fallbacks that you see if a person were to just copy paste what this, generation tool is giving them?
Yeah. So I think what you alluded to a second ago, where you said it's mathematical,
Mhm.
maybe a more refined word for that would be probabilistic.
Mhm. Mhm.
Which same sphere,
Yeah.
but it's not hard coded, right? So
Right. Yeah.
what these models have, and the reason why the data is so important, is because they create essentially these internal association models between words, and they have weights associated, like just gigantic vectors, matrices of associations and weights. So if you see cat and dog, they're pretty closely together in terms of association, right?
Mhm.
But dog and mouse are further away than cat and mouse are, right? And let's just say cat and hat are probably going to be kind of close because cat and a hat, right? But dog and hat are not going to be that close. So things like that, right? And it's like that for every single word. Just they're all associated. It's just like this gigantic infinite dimensional space of everything being very, very closely related in some way, or maybe further away than others. But what that leads to is these models choosing the most likely next token. So token you can think of as a word or a prefix or something like that, right?
Yeah.
What these models do is they choose the next probable or likely token that makes sense with whatever that syntax is that came before, the semantics before. So essentially that's the middle ground, right? It's probabilistic because it is going to be the average, in other
Right.
words. So if you say, build me a workout, it's going to build you something extremely sterile. That's the average of what it's seen on the internet. You see 3 by 10, 3 by 10, 3 by 10, 3 by 10, 3 by 10. So if I say, build me a leg workout, it'll be, all right, cool. Squats, 3 by 10. Leg press, 3 by 10. Walking lunges, 3 by 10. Deadlifts, 3 by 10. Calf raises, 3 by 10. Leg curls, 3 by 10. Like literally, it'll be like 10 exercises, 3 by 10, 3 by 10, 3 by 10. You don't want to just do that, right? You can say, yeah, these are my conditions. These are my limitations. This is what I'm looking for. This is the exercise equipment that I have access to. This is how much time I have access to. And it'll give you more specific answers, right? But that's, I think, a really interesting maybe experiment or take home for everyone to do is, if you're interested to see like what ChatGPT will do as you get more specific, just ask it to make you a leg workout. Say, create a leg workout for me and see what it outputs. And then slowly add qualifiers to create a leg workout with X, create a leg workout for X situation with X, right? Like just continue to add more and more and more context and see what that does to the output. That's what most people are not thinking of because, again, it's laziness, right?
Yeah.
It's just, what can I do to get me the quickest output or the quickest, like lowest hanging fruit for me to then move on? But really, it's doing all the work for you.
Right.
Give it some help, right? And that's where being able to have more real-time data for some of these models would be really, really, really important and really fucking cool. Where if we were, for example, able to integrate something like GPT-4 into an app that we were using that had all of our clients' data in it, not even just current data, but past data, and all of our other clients' past data, and all of the other coaches that we worked with past data. And it would be able to pull through all of that and say, okay, cool. In these instances in the past, this is what we've seen. Also, your trend is showing this. So maybe taking all of that context into account, this is what I'm going to tell you, or my recommendation is going to be for you tomorrow, next week, the following week, whatever. It's building a memory essentially of what that person needs in that moment. And again, the probabilistic answer to their question based on that history. But it's the data that's important. And anytime you're querying any of these Chat GPT, Claude, Gemini, whatever, any of these models, the more data you can give it, even in that context window, the more useful it's going to be. So again, it's just everyone has to overcome their innate laziness whenever it comes to this shit, because I think there's almost the assumption that if you're going to an AI, you want an answer immediately. You're like, otherwise I could just do this myself, you know?
I was just getting ready to say that. I think that a lot of the users are treating AI like Google, right? And
Exactly. Yeah.
that's not what it's meant to do. As you were just describing how to have this conversation, it's the contextual ability of these machines to be able to continue to layer and not do a single feedback loop on a you said, so I say, you said, but no, you said this, and then you said this, and then you said this, and then you said this. Now here's my answer. And I think that that's a really important, very simple, just missing puzzle piece to how people are using these, these devices, or not devices, but these generation tools, these AI, just tools. I thought about like going to the doctor, right? Like people now can go get blood drawn. You can go to LabQuest right now and say, I want these things done, right? And you can go and then Google, well, what does high this mean? What does low this mean? What is low? But how do you get, what is high, da, 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 da? This is why you talk to a doctor, and hopefully eventually a tool like Chat GPT and stuff like that. You want someone to be able to look at all of the data holistically and go, okay, maybe by itself, this would mean this, but with this could mean this. And pulling those pieces together, it's interesting because, again, it involves going back to learning these tools and really involving yourself in an actual experience with them, as opposed to just trying to take from them. I thought about, not ironically, but kind of ironically, iRobot, right? And I don't know if you remember specifically, Will Smith has the AI device of the doctor that's killed, and he keeps asking it questions, and it occasionally will give it like kind of like simple whatever, but then it'll say, hey, like, essentially you're on the wrong path. And then eventually when Will asks the right question, he goes, that is the right question. And I think it plays at the idea of like, these are tools that you are meant to have conversations with, but it is on you to ask the right questions, but you only figure out how to ask the right questions by continuing to query it and continuing to experience it in that space. Which I think brings me to, or back to, why I love how hot you get about people misusing it. And I think it's mostly just funny, because I typically assume that the cheaters get weeded out. Like the people who plagiarize their shit, like even if they get all the way through high school plagiarizing their shit and they got straight A's, like in college, they're going to get called out. Someone's going to catch you, whether you're plagiarizing in text or in speech. Someone is going to catch you and realize you do not know what the fuck you're talking about. Yeah. It's like PEDs, right? Like you can sit there and say, oh yeah, well, these guys are all juiced up. Yes, Barry Bonds was juiced out of his fucking mind, but so were all the other guys that you didn't hear about that played against him. Right? Like he is the home run king for a fucking reason. And it's because he learned how to use a tool, but he didn't forsake the work that went into using the tool. He just optimized his use of the tool by continuing to show up and do what was necessary for him to do. And I think that's where I foresee this going, is that like, yeah, sure, there will be bad users. There'll be people who skirt by and just pretend to be smart and put out, media, more data, more information to people, and they consume it like, oh, this person. So eventually it withers away. It'll crumble, because there will become more evolved people. There more people will start to use these tools in a way that truly gives them a considerable advantage. Like you will see, like, okay, wait a second, like this person is really smart and this feels different, right? This feels like somebody who went and was augmented, as opposed to someone who is just giving me answers from the fucking internet.
That is the crucial term, is augment, not replace, augment. And I think that's where people need to shift their thinking, right? They need to reframe this fear or block that they have against these tools, or AI in general or anything artificial in general, right? I mean, we can see this with things like organic versus inorganic, right? There is this like naturalistic bias that we have towards everything that seemingly comes from humans or nature or whatever, right? But as soon as we start thinking in terms of inorganic or artificial, all of a sudden there's like bad associations that pop, right? It's negative bias. But the reality is, like what we talked about before, and I'll continue to harp on, is just because you close your eyes and you cover your ears to where this is headed doesn't mean that it's going to slow it down. It all marches forward, right? Like it's inevitable. It's inevitable. Just because you don't want to have a Neuralink chip implanted in your head doesn't mean that it's not all headed that direction, right? A little bit scary for sure. But again, augment. If everyone can be made better by a tool, not even talking Neuralink, right? Just a tool. Why would you not? It's like the internet to me, right? For a long time, there were people who were like, I refuse to use the internet because it's unethical. It's too easy. It's this, it's that. Now everyone uses the internet because it just makes the most fucking sense to do. It makes the most sense. And if you don't use the internet, then I don't even know. Like
it's like, it was evolution, right? It's like either you use the internet or you just are not around anymore. You're not relevant, right? Like it's like you just got left behind.
Yeah. I mean, it pushes everything in the direction of quicker, faster, better, more quality, easier access, those types of things. And everything marches that direction. You know, if one person decides to get a Neuralink chip in their head and they become augmented by 50%, everyone else is going to slowly get Neuralink chips in their head. You know, it's the same thing with air flight, right? If there's a jet that can get you from Boston to LA in 3 hours and another one that can get you there in an hour, no matter if the 3-hour one is more, you know, environmentally friendly, it doesn't matter. Everyone's going to get on the hour. It's going to happen, right? And again, it's like you can talk about incentives, you can talk about like different priorities and values, but none of that matters because it's just human nature, right? You have to understand where these things go and what people default to. And if one person defects, everyone else defects, right? And I love game theory. I love that shit. And like, if anyone has ever looked into something called the prisoner's dilemma, like they'll understand what I'm talking about. But you cannot just expect that everyone else is going to be altruistic and everyone else is going to make sacrifices for the better of the whole. Like that doesn't happen, right? So with that being said, I think that the expectation should be that if there's a tool that allows everyone else to be more productive, save time, augment themselves, that it's going to be used. It's going to be used heavily. And it's probably going to be used pervasively as well, or perversely. Perversely is a better way I should say that. So again, it's better for everyone to get acquainted with these tools early on and figure out how to best use them. And for something like ChatGPT, it literally is to just have a conversation like you would have with a friend. It's not trying to, you know, query Google, because Google is a very different interface than a chatbot is. So figure out how to use them, figure out what their limitations are. And we talked about some of those on this episode, also like the last one that we did. Maybe we even do like a third one in this series, just to talk more about this because there's a lot that goes into it. But I can't emphasize enough like how crucial it is that everyone familiarize themselves and also get comfortable with using these tools because it's inevitable.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's a big take home, right? No matter what space you're in, we've seen it coming. And I think that's the crazy part about it, right? Like almost, and I wondered the other day, and I also wonder now, if people in like the early 1900s saw the Industrial Revolution coming, right? If farmers and field hands and stuff like that saw the revolution coming, and if you had that same kind of resistance, that same kind of like, no, I don't want to do this, or that's not how things are going to, like if there was that relative denial, I feel like with machines, tangible things, I think humans typically do better with. And because this is so intangible in the way that it's data, right? It's something you're interacting with, and it's kind of amorphous in a way. You're not looking at a physical like cotton mill or cotton gin rather, like you're seeing something on a screen and you're not really knowing what's happening on the other side of it. And so I don't know if that adds to the mystique or the wariness of it, but to that same extent, these things are revolutionizing the way we do everything. And to your point, if you're not comfortable with it, you'll just get weeded out. You'll just get left behind. And then you're left with the dilemma of like, do I need to catch up, or do I just accept the fact that like it's pretty much done for me, right? Like I'm not going to be able to interact and engage with others the way they can interact and engage with themselves, right? So if you're listening, this is your call to action to make sure that you just start tinkering around with these things. Like you will thank your past self if you spend time today, at least in juvenile nature, to start tinkering around with these things, having conversations. When you have questions, instead of Googling, hop in there and have the conversation, see what it spits out. If you need something more specific, which I encourage you to be more specific, ask it a follow-up question and see how these things work. If you're currently using it, please start asking follow-up questions, because I promise you your shit will probably be better. Your copy paste that you put out there will probably be better if you have an actual conversation with it. But like Bryce said, I think that we will probably be due for a third iteration of this at some point. We'd love to get you guys visuals of what we actually see as far as the disparity between where these tools are at and where we'd like to see them go, and also how we as intermediaries, as coaches, or whatever field you're in, can use these tools really responsibly, and again, in a way to augment where you currently are.
Agreed.
Cool. Thank you everyone for tuning in, and we will see you next time.